All right, when the TVA, when they first showed up, what was your reaction? What were your thoughts? What was going through your minds at the time when you hear that the TVA may take your lands?
Well, it was long before they ever showed up at our door. From the time I was in the first grade, 6 years old, until it was passed, the appropriations were passed, I think, in '66 by Johnson, and then the actual work started in '67. Well, during all this time, it was in the paper, and it's been proven by some documents that from the archives of TVA that they weren't quite honest with what they let on as what was going on. So the appropriations were going back and forth between Timms Ford in Middle Tennessee and the Tellico project. And it would be back. Now there'd be defeats, then there would be wins. So for a number of years, it was back and forth. It was like, this will never happen. Look at that beautiful river. Look at everybody's, this cannot disappear. It's all we know. And so you sort of shoved that back because, I mean, it was crazy in a way. And then when it was proven, we didn't see the TVA for a long time because they centered on the dam and the building of the actual concrete part of it. So the work and the little white government cars and trucks that they drove were down there most of the time. And then they filtrated in, I think it was maybe '68. Jackson Chapel was one of the earliest things in the Jackson community that disappeared. And so when that started happening, we sort of, then the tune around the table was, well, Daddy would say, Lee Dewsbury said he heard this, and then Mama would say, well, she'd heard Mrs. Carpenter say she'd heard this at the grocery store, and it would be just word of mouth up and down the creek. But our very first encounter was, I think, March the 3rd, 1969. The man's name was Tom Jester, and he came to the farm, and he said he was there to appraise our farm for the Tennessee Valley Authority. And Daddy said, well, the farm's not for sale. And he said, well, I'm here to appraise it. He just repeated it. Mm-hmm. And Daddy said, it's not for sale for you, to you, or to anybody else. Mm-hmm. And so Mr. Jester gave him a card and said, well, you can call me, like Daddy was going to call him. So he left. About 2 weeks, week and a half, he shows up again. Same spiel. Mm-hmm. He's there to, no, you can't, no. So twice in March of '69, and they didn't come back to our house, our door, our driveway for 5 years. 5 years. So 5 years, they don't come near us, but they've dealt with Grandma Ritchey. They've dealt with Daddy's Uncle Joe Ritchey. They've dealt with the Carpenters. They've dealt with the Kerrs. They've dealt with Miss Nellie Burton, Stanley Kittrell, people all around us, but they didn't come near us.
So what do you think that was?
Because they saw right quick, we said no. And what happens is when you do let them appraise, the way they come when you tell them no is they were condescending, they were abusive with their words, they were manipulative, they were flat out bullies. They'd say, you can't beat the government. This is the government. TVA is the government. You can't beat them. Nobody ever has, and nobody ever will. And so they would tell you what they wanted you to think. And if they got it in your head and you thought the same way, then you just throw up your hands.
And that's what most families did.
And that's what most families did, yes, because they were told you can't beat it.
Right.
And in order to fight it, we said no so many times. And then when they came back in '74, and it was Pruitt and Phillips this time. Jester was, I don't know what happened to him. He failed his mission, so I don't know if they pulled him off the job. And so they sent these other two, and so they were told no. And Mama would say, well, what do you want with the place? What's TVA want with the place? We don't know. We just hear what we hear on television. or we don't know, the higher-ups don't tell us what. And so finally Daddy said, well, you can just appraise what's we know will be on the water, because we were miles from the dam. We were on the outskirts. We had seen maps that we thought was part of at least Duke's Spirit. I don't know how he got his hands on them, but he had a map, and it showed us on the edge of the 38,000 acres. I mean, 38,000 acres, Darrell, and 22,000 extra acres. So they had plenty to appraise and hippity hop. So we kept saying no, no, no all year. I think 11 times they came on and off. And so we were getting ready for Christmas in '74, and we're getting ready to go down to Miss Grace Burton's, because that was a great place. There was a bunch of little cedar trees right down there, and that was always where we got our Christmas tree. Well, most of the time. And so we were delivered condemnation papers. So we were federally condemned in December of '74, right before Christmas. And so the condemnation papers say you have 20 days to stand up and get you a lawyer, prove to us you're going to fight it. And after 20 days, if you don't do anything, then this is what we're offering, and this is what we'll send you this check. And it was $98,150. We had 119 acres. We had a creek boundary. We had a well. We had 2 barns. We had a house, a chicken house, 470 feet deep well, I think. It was fenced, cross fenced. We had road frontage. You couldn't replace yourself for that. Plus, we weren't going to be underwater, and we knew that because we were on this plateau. So, again, you asked earlier about Mama and Daddy. They had backbone, and they had principle, and they knew that they couldn't just bend over. They had bought the farm, paid for the farm, and raised all 4 of us. And in '74, I guess I was a freshman, and how was he at that time? Marianne and Sally were already teaching school, because we never left home. All 6 of us stayed there all the way to the very end in '79 when we were forced to move. And so that's what other people, we didn't have a lot of money. The money we earned from farming went back into the farm, fertilize, seed, crops, tractors, new plows, whatever. Didn't go to the house. We had a house to live in, and it was our home, and we liked it. Suited us. Was it a Sequoia Hills house? No, but it was a home, and we didn't see anything wrong with it. And so that's what they did. They went to the sick people. They went to the afflicted people. They went to the people they knew that they could manipulate, because these TVA people, according to their archives, were taught how to go in and smooze and saddle up, and like we mentioned earlier, they'd get into the community and they'd find who had loose lips and who would talk, and then they would go to that person. Well, does so-and-so over here owe any money? Well, does so-and-so over here, are they pretty good health? So-and-so over here a pretty good farmer? Do they owe big money? Do they go in debt? Do you think they'll sell? So they go in and they find out all they could about you. And then the weak ones went first. And then when that mom and daddy had told them no, but I think it's ironic that in 38,000 acres, 3 families, Mosers, Ritcheys, and McCaws. But now, that's not to say, according to this archive that I found of theirs, 692 tracts were taken over the 38,000. 58 were condemnations. Now, 340-something farm families. And this book that I've written is just one story.
What justified a condemnation? What defined that?
It was taken through eminent domain because they declared, the federal government, that it was for the betterment of the public. And anytime the government decides they want your property and it's for the public good, they just have to put eminent domain on there, and nothing fights it. So ours was taken through eminent domain.
And that's politicians would.
Yes, and that's what they would threaten any other landowner that said, no, you can't appraise. They'd say, well, we'll just come through it on eminent domain, and you'll end up going.
A good portion of your book, for those who have not read it yet, a lot of it deals with the struggles with the various politicians from Tennessee all the way up to the presidents who served at that time, the governor, and I guess Governor Winfield Dunn. He was one of the few that supported the farmers out there.
He was probably the only one. Because I had it, I didn't bring it with me, I don't think. There were like 6 presidents and 5 governors over the 19-year period that it crisscrossed. I mean, it's a 19-year long story just from the time it came into the public eye until it was over. So it is a long story with lots of special interests from the Cherokee, the Indians, the archaeologists, because while
The snail darter.
the snail darter and the politicians in there, and then the farmer and the landowner, and then the politicians that were local. See, that was another one of their tactics. TVA would go in and promise this little principality and this little civic organization money. And we're going to shift and shuffle so much money. Well, what politician didn't want to say, well, that was on when I was in office, we brought in this X amount of dollars. And so that's all it took for some of them. Money
Oh, yeah.
talks.
Well, from 74, when they came in
And condemned us.
y'all would stay there another 5 years until 79.
And Mom and Daddy paid taxes. And when we went to the courthouse, they'd say, you can't pay taxes on land that's not yours. When Mama said that land is ours, we've not taken any money, I will pay taxes. So I know that money's probably over in Nashville of the unclaimed money. It's got to be. And they also would go to the courthouse, the TVA, and they take your name off the deed. They took our deed right out of the courthouse, took our name off of it like we didn't exist, put their name on it. Because we were federally condemned and it was by eminent domain. It's like we didn't exist anymore. We were squatters.
So it was over a 10-year period of time then, from 13 years, from 66 to 79, that you're fighting this. So my question is, where did your parents get that fortitude, that willpower to fight a big federal agency like that?
They knew they were right, Darrell. And they grew up in the Depression to where whatever came along and was put in their lap, you were trained from an early age as a kid, you just dealt with it. You didn't whine. When we grew up with this, see, this was my whole from age 6 to 24. I dealt with this, and my brother and sisters did as well. It was just, you dealt with it, whatever was there. They knew they were right. It was not going to be underwater, and they didn't feel like the federal government had the right to use eminent domain, to take personal property, to resell, because that's what they were going to do, to make money for the project. And once they took land, our neighbors' land, and they settled with them, then TVA turned around and rented that to farmers, and they made their money back in lots of instances that they had spent on the property. So they made money on the land that they took.
And I think I remember right, where you all actually, after 79, you actually rented portions of your own farm.
Back 6 years.
Yeah.
Until, see, TVA they were going to develop it. And so they can't develop, they couldn't lure anybody in here. Nobody wanted to deal with TVA. They had no overseer. Even the General Accounting Office and the Interior, they wouldn't even answer to the higher powers of them. So they, I lost my train of thought. What was I saying? You asked me something. Oh, I got off on a tangent.
Well, we were talking about just the fortitude that your parents had in fighting this, and then.
Yeah, well, they knew they were right, and when you know you're right, you're going to stand there. It's worth the cost.
Well, Daddy was busy making a living in farming, and Mom was writing these letters and going to Washington. And seeing the snail darter stopped it there. It was stopped. There wasn't any moving for how many years?
Well, the darter was discovered in 73, but TVA pitched all kinds of hissy-do fits and told all kinds of tales before it was ever put on the endangered species list and made, and then they had to make the Little Tennessee River section and also endangered. The darter didn't have to just be endangered to save it. Its habitat had to also be separately listed as endangered. So there were lots of highs and lows.
Oh, yeah. If they read the book, they can find out more in detail.
Yeah, it's quite a detailed ordeal.
Well,
I don't feel like I answered that question very good.
yeah. So, tell us what happened once you all were removed from your land in '79. What did you do then?
Well, do you want to know about our last eviction? See, we had several.
Yeah.
We had several evictions.
Yeah, but the very last one. Yeah, tell us about the very last eviction.
The very last one, Mama was being interviewed by Henry Moulter from the Lenore City News for the second time. And they're out on the front porch, and she's being part of the interview. And TVA drives up in our circle drive, and they walk up to the edge of the porch, and they lean in, and they hand her this letter. And she takes it, and they turn and leave, and Henry and Mama watch some dust settle as they drive off. And so when Daddy and Randy come in for dinner, she reads them the letter. And that was in October. I think it was dated, maybe October 12th. It was in October. I can't remember the exact date. And so it said we had to be out by November the 9th. And so, but we'd been told before we had to be out December the 31st here or December the 1st here, and we just ignored it. We just stayed. So we figured, well, this will just be another one. And I know people who weren't in this probably thought, well, those are crazy people. What's wrong with them? But no. So that was the last time that was given to us. So November the 9th came, and Marianne and Sally and I were teaching school, living at home. We went on to school. Just like, it was just another day, but I mean, my gosh, we'd lived with this for 19 years.
Right.
I mean, it was like, oh, well, here's a little nasty fly. Let's just knock it off over here. And so here's another little. And so Ms. McCall and Burl Mosier, they stayed too. So then that Saturday came, and there were news people down there saying, family's still here. TVA gonna have eviction, haul them out of there. So then Sunday was November the 11th, Veterans Day. And of course, as we mentioned, Daddy was a Navy veteran with an honorable discharge. And so our lawyer called us that Sunday morning. We were getting ready to go to Bethel to church. By that time, Bethel had already been torn down and moved and rebuilt because of where it was positioned. It would be underwater. And so he came down and he said, this is the end of the road, because it was after Carter had refused to veto. He says, there's no other legal route to go. We don't have any other avenue. See, as long as there was an avenue to go down, we held our ground. So it's like when the darter had it stopped, there wasn't any need to leave. And they had a whole big thing with the Interior and TVA about how to keep the land as as dry land and not and have like a dry dam is what they called it, where they would just use it for flood control and then leave it for. So, and they said that was worth more than a lake and anything of this in their alternative plan that they came up with. Well, anyway, he told us that there were no more avenues to go. So we had, I call it in the book, 3 rat holes. We had 3 rat holes to go down, and who wants to go down a rat hole? One was you let them move you, and they confiscate everything you've got, from your dogs to your cats to your underwear drawer to your scrap iron around your tree to all your vehicles, everything, household, barn, cattle, tobacco hanging in the barn. They move it and they put you somewhere for 2 weeks. Well, Daddy still had crops that he had rented from the Bacon farm and the Hitch farm that weren't mature and weren't ready. And that's how we made our living. We had to have our crop. We had too much in it. And Daddy had made a contract with the heirs, those heirs that had gotten it for him. So that was one rat hole. The other one was you could just stand there and say, I'm not going anywhere, and they'd haul you off to jail and haul all that off anyway. So the only way that we could control our own destiny, so to speak, was to move ourselves. So we moved up about a half a mile to the Billy and Herman Rogers' mother's house. She was in the nursing home. And so we moved the week from the 11th to the 16th. We moved everything. Tobacco, cattle, dogs. We couldn't move the cats. Every time we'd move them, we'd go back. While there they'd be. I don't know how they were swift. We weren't that far away, so it didn't take them long to get back. And so then from there we would we drove by. We went back every day. It was like home, and there was our house. We had everything out of it. There were the barns, and of course we were at school one day, and Mama. We drove by, she drove by, and they were, lo and behold, TVA was there with bulldozers and high lifts, and they were knocking the house down. So they had started the demolition. So she flew up to the Rogers house and got those little Instamatic Kodak cameras, and she came back and she told us later she had a hard time keeping her hands still.
Okay.
Because everything this woman had fought for and gone to Washington 6 times, spoke before Senate hearings in 1977, 1978, and had then gone up a total of 6 times to lobby. And she'd written all these wonderful letters, and she had all this fight. So here she's watching where she raised her kids, taught them all their life lessons of stand for everything, that is right. And she said they wouldn't look at her. They kept their backs turned. They apparently thought there was going to be trouble because the county deputy was there on the premises, but he was off from a distance. And so we had no knowledge that this was the day. It was November the 27th, and 1979. It didn't stand long before they came in and knocked it down. But it could still be standing there today. It's housing. It's the Chattooga neighborhood. And so we each had to face an empty plateau for the first time individually, and it was hard to swallow to not see that house silhouette in the barns.
Well,